Hi guys, Rhiannon here, and today I'm giving you 3 tips for realistic and varied efforts and exertions in video games. This was inspired by a session I had with a coaching client recently, where they mentioned they wanted some tips to help make efforts less awkward. So this is for you, and for anybody else, especially those starting out who perhaps don't know where to start with efforts, but even veterans who've been doing efforts and exertions for a while and might be starting to think, wow, these are all beginning to sound the same. So hopefully this will help inform your practice, get you more creative, and make you feel confident when performing efforts and exertions. So before we go any further, what are efforts and exertions in video games? They are the incidental sounds that characters make when they're performing physicality, generally. So the walking, the running, the grunts, the groans, the climbing, the swinging a weapon, the being stabbed by a weapon, the being on fire, the drowning, the dying, the screaming, all of that lovely stuff that really brings the world to life. The stuff that takes it from just a regular storytelling experience to something quite immersive. And having said that, it makes you realize it's a very important part of what we do, but it's quite often left to the end of the session, can be quite rushed if you're in a live session because, oh gosh, we've already 15 minutes over time and this needs to be done, and it can catch you off guard, so you might not always feel like you give your best. And essentially, hopefully these tips will guide you towards making informed, confident choices and delivering superb efforts and exertions every time. So, the first tip is breath. Remember that all efforts and exertions come from the breath. If you think too much about the noise or the sound you make when you do something, it can sound forced, constructed, not quite right or natural. A good way to do this is to just observe the natural way you breathe when you're exerting yourself in real life. I think the best way to start is with a heavy shopping bag. Either go and get yourself a heavy shopping bag or mime one. And just pick it up and observe what your breath naturally does. No sound, just breath. If my mic even picked that up. So little. But what you'll notice is the breath catches and then releases. And that's really a big part of what forms all of our efforts and exertions that we make. So, observing when the breath catches, when it releases, and how it releases will inform more interesting and naturalistic efforts and exertions. So, using a ledge, you're getting yourself up over it. Easy, right? I've breathed in to prep myself, and I'm pushing, and then I'm over. Breath releases. If I'm just going, it doesn't sound quite right. We're missing the inhale. So remember that everything has an inhale, a hold, and a release. And if you work with those at varying speeds, you can then start to add voice. So it isn't just air. So it goes from to perhaps and you can play with variation, but always start with the breath. Breath is paramount. Breath controls everything. Number 2, get physical. As you've observed, I always get physical when I'm doing my exertions, whilst being careful not to make too much noise that I upset the mic. That's very important. But if you can, do actually work some sort of movement out, even if it's just in practice, if you don't have the luxury of being able to do it in the booth, because it will inform how you create the sounds. So, for example, let's say you've got to climb a ladder. If you've got a ladder outside, great, go climb it. That'll be fantastic. That'll really help inform your movement. If not, you can just step outside your booth, or in your booth if space allows, and perform the action. Now, when I say perform the action, don't just well, that's not going to do anything. I mean, it's a great dance party, but you're not informing anything. What you need to do is activate the muscles you would be using if you were actually climbing a ladder. So I place one hand here, and I'm reaching, and I'm pulling. And it might be hard to see here, but boom, look at that bicep. I am actually activating this muscle. And by activating the muscles, I can feel when the breath holds and releases, and get really pink in the face while I do it. So, whilst using your breath, make sure you're also activating the muscles you would be using. And if you're swinging a weapon and it's coming from the shoulder, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear the sense of all those muscles tense and release. That will help inform it. And thirdly, let context inform your movement. Now, this is going to be what separates all of your exertions from each other. It can be difficult when we're doing our job, as we might not get a lot of context, especially for things like efforts. But what we will often have is a character. And if you've got a character, you can change things. So for example, let's say my character is an ingenue. She's quite weak, a little bit mousy, perhaps a bit of a princess, and in my mind, she has not done much physical activity in her entire life. But here she is, traversing this amazing fantasy world, and she needs to climb a ledge. All right, great. How does she do that? Probably with great difficulty. She uses a lot of vocals because she's a bit dramatic. Maybe she slips. Because, and once again, I acted it out. It's hard to see here, but I let one hand drop and see how that made my breath and my body move, and my voice sort of just fell out in response. It's all very natural and kind of trusting your instincts, if that makes sense. As opposed to, let's say, one of her companions is a soldier. And this woman has been climbing ledges since she was a 9-year-old, and it's old hat for her. So she's just really easy. Perhaps she gets a run-up. Great. Already those two are exerting in the same world, but they are completely different. And a little bonus tip, in case they don't write this, quite often when you get efforts, they will say we need a short, medium, and long. But if they don't, always give 3 options. The way I like to do it is to start from breath. So I'll give the breath one first, the heavy shopping bag lift. Then I'll give one slightly voiced. Then I'll give one heavily voiced. Then, on occasion, not all the time, I might decide that I want to throw in a cheeky improvised line if it feels right in the character. Oh, God, is she buying bricks? Just something to give it flavor, and if it feels right in the moment. So there we have it. 3 tips for more realistic and varied efforts and exertions. I didn't go too much into combat. I might do a video about that later because I have a lot of tips and tricks I use when I'm making combat exertions. And I want to keep this one as brief as possible. But what you need to remember is your breath informs everything. Get physical, perform the action where you can, or at least activate the muscles you would use to create that action. And thirdly, use the context you have. However little that context is, bring it into play because it will help vary your efforts and exertions and create more interesting performances. All right, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope these were helpful. Catch you later, guys!